Good morning, everyone. I hope you all had a good break. I think that setting, this architecture and those beautiful artworks make it quite a setting. And can't forget the chilly mornings. That's nice, especially for a person coming from that way. It's really nice. Um, I My name is Karthik. I work with Manga Bay India as a multimedia editor. My role largely involves working with people who use multimedia tools in their reporting, in their journalism. And I'm really delighted to have uh, a range of panelists here who use different tools in their storytelling, in their communication. And what largely it helps us do is take our stories to a broader audience, hopefully create wider impact, reach a diverse audience. But apart from that, in the past 5 years that I worked with multimedia contributors, I've realized that it also opens up opportunity for people who are not regular users of multimedia to get an idea of how you work in that space, and it opens up more opportunities. So not everybody needs to learn all the skills. Sometimes it can look really daunting, but if you know how to work with a multimedia specialist, a person who does video or podcasts, it just opens up more collaboration opportunities for everybody. And that's really helpful for editors, for freelancers, for everybody. So, what I would like to start with is a question for Shreya. Shreya, you have experimented with videos, podcasts, and other mediums. You started as a text journalist. I want to hear from you what made you take these formats into your portfolio, and how has it helped you? But also, how did you do the mental shifting in the gear to jump between a video and a podcast and a text story? Yeah, thanks, Karthik, for inviting me to this panel. I think when I was starting out as a science journalist 10 years ago, what I thought were the formats for science storytelling journalism were primarily news and feature in text format. But I realized that over the years I was consuming a lot of, I would listen to podcasts, watch a lot of YouTube videos, and I realized that a lot of those were made by journalists, and so they were done with those sort of core journalistic values. And I really enjoyed listening to them, watching them, and I would often wonder, what if we did this in India, similar stories or similar kind of storytelling. And I think a lot of us have those thoughts. What if I did this? What if we tried this out? And I did experiment a lot over the last 10 years. It was mostly as a hobby. So there are, tons of these files in my folders that have not been put out to the public. But then I really, instead of just thinking about what if I did this, I finally decided to take the plunge. And unless you do it and you see what the process is like, shifting gear from being primarily a text journalist to doing podcasts or video writing for video is can be quite different. There are similar principles of journalism, but the way you write for a different audience that listens to you or watches you is very different than an audience that reads you. Um, so what earlier I used to passively listen and watch videos or listen to podcasts. So then I actively started listening to podcasts and watching videos to see what they were doing, what was their style, how were they crafting, what was writing. And I knew that I could put those skills, but I just needed to sort of shift my mental frame when I was writing for those different formats. And for podcasts and videos, I realized that, it opens up such a different universe for people, because there's sound you can play with, there are visuals you can play with. And for science, which can get daunting when you're reading, and you sort of can get you can tune out very easily, it's easier to keep people hooked in these different multimedia formats. And so for videos, I got a chance to do it while I was at Mongabay, while I was a staff writer there. And for podcasts, I decided to do it when I became an independent journalist again, because I just wanted to experiment with different formats, and being a freelancer sort of gave me that freedom to do so. Thank you. My next question is for you, Devika. I'd like to hear, how did you get into reporting on AI and also using AI in your regular work?
Right. Um, so my brush up with AI happened back in 2020. And so before that, I have been into the digital journalism field since 2008. I've been using Google Analytics. There are so many other things that we have been using, automation and all. But AI back in 2020, I was working with Microsoft News, and I was working there as a curator. And around May 2020, this was COVID time, we were informed that there are going to be layoffs. So nowadays, people keep asking, is AI going to take your job? Well, it did took my job back in 2020. There were around 300 people who were laid off in the country, and I was part of that team. But it got me curious about the subject, like we all are curious today, and started studying it. I enrolled myself in a PhD at Amity University. I'm doing AI and Indian journalism. I'm studying that. Still not very close to completing my PhD, but in the process. So, because of that curiosity, I again got a job with Microsoft News, which was about moderation, comment moderation. So this was US 2020 election time, and human comments cannot be moderated. So MSN brought in again these editors, some of the editors who were laid off. So that was the time I started working in AI. I was training an algorithm which was trying to identify the cuss words, trying to identify if these cuss words can be removed. And currently, I'm working in the role of a fact checker and media literacy trainer with Vishwas News. So, there, as a fact checker, I'm both in the role of a reporter and editor, because I'm not just hashing or rehashing copies. I'm also investigating a particular news item. And during the process, we use AI tools. For literacy videos, we do AI tools to create literacy front videos. And this is an example. So, this video we just created last week for AI literacy. The two characters that you see on screen, Feku and Sachi, they are AI generated through HeyGen tool. And we do give a disclaimer. Before starting this video, if this video can be played, we can see that in the first screen we have a disclaimer that the entire script of this whole video was created using ChatGPT. The two characters were created using HeyGen tool, and the voiceover was created through another tool, 11 Labs. So we give disclaimers, and that's how we do it at Vishwas News.
Thanks, Devika. Rohan, we have been reading your comics for quite some time, and I'm sure everybody is familiar with green humor. Uh, can you tell me, from the time you started to now, how have you seen the evolution of usage of comics and illustration in science journalism or science communication?
I have to thank uh, you and the team for having me here first. Even though I feel like a bit of an intruder, it's the panel is called Latest Films in Science Journalism, and I fit none of these labels. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a journalist. Latest also does not fit my work because I'm a very old school cartoonist. So, in fact, to answer your question honestly, the use of cartoons is diminishing in the media, and sadly, after COVID and after advertisement revenue faced a shortage with newspapers. Even though cartoons are among the most shareable commodities of a newspaper, the most dispensable parts of a newspaper have always been cartoonists themselves. So I don't know why that is the case, but there has been some evolution as well. There has, yeah, there has been some evolution as well in this regard, in a sense that scientists, for example, and publishers outside of newspapers are feeling the need to break complex information down using the help of cartoons and illustrations. And I think among my peers as well, there has been a growing desire to collaborate with people who do science, to not just look out for new material, but also to enrich your own content, to enrich your own minds, and team up with something, and see what comes out as a product of it. So there has been an evolution in that sense. And Yeah, if I speak about my own column, I think readers as well as publishers are growing aware of the fact that what I draw about science, the science about conservation, the science about ecology, is intrinsically intertwined with politics, especially in a country like ours. And there's growing awareness of that, and there's growing acceptance of that. So I would say that is something that that's a change I've been noticing over the years. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'll come back to the point about working for editorial cartoons. Vijdan, data journalism, graphic journalism, it sounds really fascinating and catchy, and we would all love these visualizations to appear in our own stories. Um, but right at the start, I want to ask you, you have been a data journalist for 5 years, correct? And in that time, has there been like a skill that you came across that you weren't taught in data journalism class or course?
That's an interesting question. Am I audible? Yeah. So suppose I have 20 skills that I use day to day in data journalism. You want to guess how many I got in or acquired in the college? Zero. Correct. There's hardly any institute in India right now which has a dedicated, or not even a dedicated, even remote course on data journalism, except a couple that have started now. Uh, in fact, until I became a data journalist, I had never heard of a phrase called data journalist. It was, I see it as my fortune and luck that at the time when I was looking for a first full time job, that is the time when Hindustan Times was looking for a data journalist. And it was not something I was chasing, it was something that came my way. It came after, like she said, she got laid off, then it led to something else, and now she would be feeling very good that she got laid off that time. So I feel good that no one responded to my mails for 7 months. I was just sending for all the roles everywhere, no one responded. And then this data journalism stuff came up. I saw what work they do. I had no idea how it's done, but I felt like it's very interesting. I was also interested in computers, so I thought, let me give it a try. And thankfully, as I said, I feel fortunate that I got that first job. Then everything that I learned on job. In fact, there's a data journalism survey done last year by datajournalism.com, uh, with I think 300 data journalists across the world, and it says like 1 in 3 data journalists are taught on job without a formal training.
You can keep the mic. I'm going to ask the next question to you. So, is there any soft skill that is very underrated or not spoken about when you speak about a niche like data journalism or graphics journalism that you need to do that kind of a role?
I think the most important skill, I don't know if we call it a soft skill, but the journalism skill is the most important. Scientists use data, of course they do, but they do it at a different level. They do it at a level where it may not matter to common people, it may not be a headline grabber, but for us as a journalist, when we use data, we need to keep our audience in mind. So unless we understand audience, unless we understand what drives news, it's very difficult to do data journalism or graphic journalism. Then there are other things like how well we understand design, how well we understand colors, what are the cool charts we can make. But that's everything else is secondary. First thing is, if you don't make a good story, you don't do anything else.
I'd like to add to that. So any profession today, I think the one of the most important soft skill that we need is empathy. You really need to be in someone else's shoes to understand what type of data is required in that story or what type of video is required for a particular topic. So empathy is really required, which I think is missing. That is one of the important soft skills, and I think that was trending back in 2023. It was one of the most important soft skills needed in any organization in 2023 as per LinkedIn survey.
I'm going to come to you for the next question. Can you tell me from your observation, how are Indian newsrooms starting to use AI in their regular work?
So, as I said, AI has always been there. We have been using Google Analytics, Chartbeat. I remember back in 2008 when I joined Z News and we had to upload stories on the website. So, just to break the line, we used to use that code, BRBR. So, that was automated back then. So, the CMS was automated. So, we have been using AI. For as long as I remember, since 2006 at least. And now what we're talking about is generative AI, I think. And regarding that, I see two parallel windows. So there are legacy media houses and there are new or organizations that are working on niche content like News Laundry, Scroll, and Quint, and all those organizations. So with the legacy media houses, if I talk about, they have the infrastructure, they have the staff. So they're building things like India Today is working on Project Daisy, which is related to election misinformation. Sana, we all have seen how Avatar Sana is there on the screen and she's reading news. Other than that, also there are many other organizations. HT, I think. Used it for podcast 2 years back. While the new startups, not the new startups, but these other organizations which are working on the niche content, Scroll is doing fab job with Midjourney, using it in the illustration part. The Quint is using it in fact checking. Their recent Israel Hamas stories that they have been putting up on the website. It has amazing content created by Midjourney, and they're putting disclaimers about it that we are doing it via that. I recently attended a conference where they displayed their work. So these are some of the ways, but when we talk about AI generated part, of course there are issues with copyright material. Can we use that or not? In our newsroom itself, we are using it in summarization. We are using it for translation. That is happening for personalization. Project Daisy is working on personalization part, but about images and content part, it is still restrictive because the legacy media houses cannot easily use that because they might get sued back. So we have to put up disclaimers, and we are still experimenting. But the other media organizations are using it diversely.
Thank you for that. Recently, I saw Indian Express making an entire illustration using on cloud seeding. All the graphics were made using AI.
Right. Also, there's one journalist there, Ankita Deshkar. She went from Jagran to Indian Express, and a great asset, I must say. So she is very pro with the AI tools related to Twitter and social media tools. So she's coming up with regular columns about how AI generated content is creating problem in misinformation and disinformation. She's regularly coming up with those columns, so you can follow her for that as well. She's doing great.
Thanks. And that's something that we need to be updated about on a regular basis, regardless of our focus area.
Right. I mean, the previous session also had this conversation. So, as a practitioner, as a journalist, I have been into journalism for the last 15 years, and also as a researcher, because I'm also studying AI, I really feel that there's a need to bridge that gap. We also to develop the scientific research part. I mean, as journalists, we are already researchers, therefore we are journalists. In some hook and corner, as a journalist, I have to research to get out a story or to investigate a story. But there's more need of that scientific research, and there's need to bridge that gap between researchers and practitioners. Now it can happen with collaborations, or you can also take up this as new skill and start researching, learning more scientific research.
That's a lot of tasks to do. Uh, yeah. Shreya, I want to ask you next. I really admire your podcast, Imagine Tomorrow, and how it creates a hypothetical situation and connects it back to reality. Can you tell us why you chose this approach to storytelling and how has it worked for you?
So I started the podcast during COVID, and the future seemed very bleak. And the thing about the future, who gets to talk about the future? Who gets to predict what the future might be like? And the voices usually tend to come from the West. So I wanted to do something very India-centric, looking at possible, not so possible, hypothetical future scenarios that we might see in India or India might see, and then talk to people here, use our understanding of our country, our science here to sort of talk about those possible or not so possible futures. And the idea was basically, again, to predict, not to predict, but sort of take our current understanding of science and then use it, our current science, politics, social understanding to sort of then imagine what a future might look like. And I used the format I went on to do in the second season was use a bit of fiction, very small clips of fiction to begin with, and then go on to the journalistic, non-fiction, narrative part. The fiction was to sort of set up, because it's very difficult to imagine what future you are talking about when you're just listening to something or when you're reading text. So I decided I wanted to do a bit of fiction to sort of create a situation in people's minds as to what to look forward to, and then we would discuss that with actual real scientists. There's if where did Shruti go? So I'd like to play a small clip of what the fiction bit sounded like.
Shreya, in the meantime, maybe I can ask you
Okay. Sorry.
a follow-up question till they figure that out. Is this style of storytelling, have you come across more formats using fiction in their narrative for journalism, for science-based communication?
So there are a few examples in the West. So Flash Forward is one that does this very well, but they used to have, I mean, it's ended now. They used to have money, so they could do like very well deep played out fiction and then non-fiction, but given budgetary constraints, which is universal in science journalism in India, I had to rely on friends and family to sort of play those parts. Yeah, if you can just play. Okay. No problem. So imagine this. In a hypothetical future, the air keeps getting toxic. But we take a decision. We decide to enclose our neighborhoods and cities within giant domes with clean air inside. Imagine an ad like this. Hello, Daddy. Why are you coughing again? I know. My throat always feels like sandpaper when the air is this grey and smoky. Sandpaper? Told you so many times, better just come stay with us during these months now. In Gurgaon? तो Gurgaon accent में बोल रहा हूँ. I remember. What's that? You summer or winter, the air is always clean and crisp. Remember, we had that marathon during Diwali here in our dome? The air is always clean and crisp. Yes, Aja beta, your city is getting really bad. People worried about your health. It's all work from home anyway. Commute and work. In good weather, good air. Inside the dome. Welcome to La Dome in Bursa. From this curriculum, you take luxurious layouts located entirely inside the clean air dome, complete with apartments of school, playgrounds, parks, and offices, all within a tightly controlled air dome that maintains the best quality filtered by air. Taking deep breaths as you saunter throughout for her step years, meditating in world-class parks, and enjoy. Yeah, so the idea was to thank you. Sort of you immediately go into that future where you're imagining living inside an air dome, a town that's inside an air dome. And then I spoke to people, architects and scientists and social scientists, and talked about technically what would an air dome look like, how large can it be, what can it enclose, who gets to live inside those air domes if it does exist. And there are some examples even today in Delhi that sort of imitate this dome structure. So then we go on to real life examples. So yeah, this was a fun episode to do.
Thank you for sharing that. Rohan, I'd like to come to you next. Touching upon the editorial work that you have done in the past, can you talk a bit about how your process has been to work with a news publication as opposed to when you do your cartoons independently or for a non-journalistic portal?
So, of course, with news, I know by now what people like to read and what people will expect in a column like mine. Even though it is about ecology, about wildlife, if there is any current affairs pertaining to an environmental issue, especially if there is a collision between governance and a particular environmental issue, I think I tend to focus more about those kind of issues for the newspaper column compared to what I would do in a journal or a space that is focused more on wildlife and ecology. So, but I also try to merge all of these entities into my column, and that's kind of become the identity of my series. So this cartoon, for example, it's not just about tiger conservation, which is a universal point of discussion in our country, but it also speaks about a specific scientific issue, which is the tiger gene pool and its connection to uh, corridor connectivity. And it is a very scientific, jargon-filled issue for me to explain to a layman. But because Times of India, people like Times of India offered me the space for a month, it ran as a cartoon column called Saving Our Stripes. I wanted to, break down science around tiger conservation in simple visuals as much as I could. So this is an example from that series, and there are many other such examples in the series as well, where uh, I try to engage my audience and break down something that is really complicated to explain into the simplest visual with a touch of humor. So my general rule in the thumb rule I follow is that if I am able to retain uh, and uh, and understand better through my own visual something that is complex for me to understand, my audience would be too, because I generally consider myself dumber than my readers.
A follow-up question to that, actually. When you work with editors at these publications, what kind of skill or knack that an editor has helps in your work reaching where it has to, or having the impact that you wanted to? Because they are not illustrators, they are not artists, they are just interacting with you to have your work in their publication. So what is their uh, what kind of skill in them helps your work?
Laziness. Laziness. Yeah, if the editor is lazy, he or she gives me a lot of creative freedom.
Thank you. Vijdan, Devika mentioned something about collaboration between journalists and researchers, and also the need to address that gap. And I see a lot of Reuters stories which have a lot of people involved in them, and I'm sure they are all doing different tasks. Uh, so, can you talk a bit about the need for collaboration to produce large data visualization based stories, and where does collaboration come into play in your work?
I think 99% of the stories that we do in Reuters graphics is a collaborative project. Think of a think of a short film without a camera person, an editor, a sound artist. That is similar things that we do in the team as well. So our collaboration happens at different levels. One is, as you mentioned, the inter-team collaboration, where skills of different people are put in. We have illustrators and people who know art very well. We have them in the team. We have very good web developers in the team. We have good map makers and illustrator and data visualization developers. So it depends on how the story is and what skills we need, and what all. It also helps us pool in different resources in terms of their expertise and knowledge, which also means we have less chances of making an error or oversight. I can also show you one example. I think, yeah, this one. We also do collaboration with the wider newsroom. Wider newsroom, as in the reporters who help us write stories or report with things so that we focus on more graphic stuff. But we also collaborate with scientists and other organizations. So in this story, for example, it's an example of how different people collaborate together. There's an animation for some reason. I don't know why it's not working on the top, but we can move ahead. Yeah. Let it be, I think. Okay. Yeah, there's an animation, trust me on
Is it?
yeah. Okay, we can move ahead. So this is an in-house thing which one of our illustrators made. Then we can just go down. Yeah. Then there's a big map which shows where the Earth moved. There was a rupture that developed. in the middle of Turkey. This is one organization that helped us get it. They had already done it. They had a very basic output on Twitter, and we reached out. And usually, scientists are very helpful in terms of getting these things done. Then there's another chart, uh, next one, which another researcher helped us analyze. Then, if we move forward, then we have our own observations. This map, for example, shows a lot of populated areas were just around the fault line, were around the place that cracked. So that also led to a lot of deaths. This was observation, but then there would be people who say, no, how do we trust you? It's not numbers, it's what you see from satellite data. Maybe there's something more to it. So we move to another level where we uh, explain why more people live around there, and then further down we do a data analysis to show how many people exactly live near that fault. Then we also use satellite imagery to put that in perspective, and if there's a land after the earthquake, there's a crack that developed. And then
Vizan, I wanted to ask one thing on this. Are these forms of collaboration with non-journalists, is that increasing in your work?
See, I haven't been in this field for so long to say whether it's increasing, but it's really optimistic. Uh, in usual journalism, I mean, regular spot news stories, when we talk to scientists or academics, they usually think that we are looking for a quote. When you ring up someone, you tell them, I want to understand this subject a bit. Okay, what's your deadline? So okay, that's what they see it as. But when we say them, we are working on it for the next 3 months, so we want like 2 hours of you to understand this, then they are all mostly they are happy to help and give support. And when they realize that we are going deeper into the story, I think that collaboration works smooth.
That's encouraging to hear. Thank you so much for taking your time out and sharing your work. I'm sure a lot of people will have questions for you guys, and you can meet them outside and talk to them further. Thank you.